Hello and welcome to Newbie Debate. Sorry for the length of the last episode. We went over introductions to debate, but ideally we're slowing it down here, or not slowing it down, but it's going to be a shorter episode because there's not going to be as much content because we're just going to be talking about Logic 101, which we can jump straight into that because we're just talking about what arguments are. So, what is an argument? An argument is a set of statements, aka premises, that provide reasons as to why a conclusion is true. So that's just a definitely more technical way of just explaining an argument. Consists of a conclusion or a claim, and then reasons as to why that claim is true. Now, people will often make the mistake that the claim of an argument is actually the argument, but that's simply not the case. An argument has to have some rationale or reasoning as to why it is the case. Saying something is wrong, saying something's incorrect, saying something's dumb is not an argument. Arguments have to make a claim, like something is like this, and then proceed to give you reasons as to why that's the case. So it's really important in debate, especially, that every argument we're making has claims, warrants, and impacts. We'll get to that later, though. So, what is competitive debate then? So debate is when we argue using arguments. A lot of people will make the mistake when learning and getting into debate where they make a ton of statements and not a lot of arguments. And ultimately, the better you get at a debater will usually be correlative with how much of your speech is being used to make arguments versus statements. So better debaters will ultimately make a lot more arguments and a lot less statements. And so that should be the goal that you're striving towards whenever we're thinking about debate as an activity. And if you really care about getting good at debate, you should be constantly thinking about how you can make arguments and being conscious that when we're giving our speeches and when we're practicing and learning how to do this activity, that the things that we're saying are more argumentative than they are just, I'm going to repeat a statement without giving you a reason why that statement's true. So let's go ahead and get into example of an argument that you might see in a day-to-day life, or rather a more formal version of an argument you might see in a day-to-day life. So these are going to be the premises that support this claim. So we'll go ahead and go in order. So subpoint A, doctors make a lot of money. And then subpoint B, people who make a lot of money can go on nice vacations. Subpoint C, I want to go on nice vacations. Subpoint D, being a doctor is the only career that makes a lot of money that I would enjoy. Therefore, subpoint E, the claim or the conclusion, I should become a doctor. So the logic here is that in order to go on nice vacations, which is something that you want to do, you have to make a lot of money. And the only way you can make a lot of money that would make you happy would be being a doctor, and therefore you should become a doctor. And there's definitely some more statements that you can add on to support this conclusion, like subpoint E, you could shift the conclusion down, and a new subpoint E should be, I don't want to do a career that doesn't make me happy. And then you add on to the argument, and you can add probably some more different statements, but arguments like this, or arguments in competitive debate typically aren't worded like this. It's usually not this formal. We usually more stay rather than subpoint A, subpoint B, subpoint C, which you will see subpoints in debate. It's more doctors make a lot of money, people who make a lot of money can go on nice vacations, I want to go on nice vacations, and it's all put together rather than being broken down like this. But ultimately the same goal that you make your claim or your argument, or the claim that your argument's trying to make, and then give the statements as to why that claim is true is fundamentally never going to change from competitive debate to your day-to-day life when you're making arguments. Next, I said this earlier, and I'll reiterate this again, you'll often hear people in debate, like coaches or judges or classmates, talk to you about claims, warrants, and impacts. So we already covered the first two in the previous, like this is your claim, and then these are the warrants that support that claim. But what is an impact? Because this is the third part of a debate argument. So an impact in terms of an argument is the reason why that argument matters. So if you win, like in the previous lecture, we talked about what debate is and how it's a debate about the resolution. So an impact to an argument in debate would be a way in which that argument proves the resolution's true or false. So generally, you have your claim, which is not the resolution is true, and then your warrants that support that claim, but then the impact is going to be the extra little bit that explains how that argument that you're trying to make matters in the grand scheme of the debate writ large. Because if you just win a bunch of different little claims, like topic for the year that this series is being made is Arctic exploration. If you like win an argument that knowing about the different types of ice in the Arctic is good, sure, that's a great argument. And you could give those reasons as to why knowing about the different types of ice is good. But if you don't have that impact that explains why knowing about the ice is a justification for why we should increase our exploration of the Arctic to learn more about the ice, then you've just won an argument that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So that's the third part about an impact in debate. Definitely is a little bit more complicated than that, and we can get more into that as time goes on, but that's just the general premise of an argument. It's claim, warrant, impact. Next, we'll go over micro versus macro arguments. So I don't think that these are official terms that you're going to hear people using in debate, but I think that most arguments can be classified as either micro or macro arguments. Micro means small and macro means large. So a micro argument are all of those little individual claims that you're going to make throughout the debate that are typically backed by evidence, whereas macro arguments are collections of micro arguments that come together to make one larger argument. So it's like a micro argument would be that example of knowing about ice is good, but then a macro argument would be a larger argument consistent of maybe, say, that argument about knowing about ice is good in addition to knowing about polar bears is good, knowing about penguins is good, and then those all come together to make one larger argument. Now, there is an example that I want to look here for a macro argument that's a consistency of micro arguments that hopefully will make sense. So micro arguments, these four are different micro arguments, but they come together to make one macro argument. So let's go ahead and go over them individually. First is, while the economy is fragile, it will be fine if we do nothing. This is a claim. Usually you'd read a piece of evidence that states that this is the case and gives reasons why, but this is an individual argument, but it connects to the rest of these. So we'll go ahead and go to number 2. The affirmative plan causes harm to the economy, which will lead to its collapse because it's fragile. So this is an argument that connects to this one, but is also an independent claim that you can support with evidence and give reasons why it's true. Third is the economic collapse, which we said happens because of the affirmative plan's harm to the economy, causes countries to go to war. And then finally, wars that spark due to economic collapse result in nuclear detonations and human extinction. So all of these are individual arguments. Like, this is an argument about what happens as a result of wars due to economic collapse. What happens as a result of economic collapse? What happens as a result of the affirmative plan's impact on the economy? What will happen if we don't do anything? So these are all individual claims with warrants and impacts, or ideally you would have those warrants together. But then you put them together to make a macro argument. And this is an example of a specific macro argument called a disadvantage that we'll get into in a later lecture. But it's a bunch of different individual arguments that come together to make one large argument, which is the following. Doing the AF plan will cause an economic collapse that otherwise wouldn't have happened that will result in human extinction via nuclear war. And these four different arguments come together to make this one larger argument, which is an example of a disadvantage in debate. So that's the difference between micro and macro arguments. You're going to make a ton of micro arguments in debate, but ultimately your macro arguments are going to be the disadvantages and advantages in the debate that are going to ultimately decide usually how the debate goes. So understanding argumentation and logic is a really important skill that a lot of people in debate don't utilize. I think if you have the opportunity to, you should read old debate textbooks on things like logical reasoning and argumentative theory. Even if they aren't old debate textbooks, you could just read books on logic and argumentation, because debate ultimately is the same. It's competitive and formal, obviously, but it's the same type of debate that was done through the invention of logical reasoning. And so if you learn about logic and you learn about argumentative theory, even if they're not specifically tailored to debate, that's ultimately what debate is. And so you're never going to, I think, become a worse debater because you learn more about logical reasoning. So if you're looking for something out of this lecture and out of this this programming to learn more about debate, and you're lacking those specific debate resources, which I think you should, because they make it a little bit more contextual to how debate works, but you can legit just go and read logical reasoning and argumentative theory, and you'll learn a lot that way. I cited the give a fisher a fishing rod versus a fish. I could tell you how arguments work, but I think understanding logic before we get into I could have started off with, here's what a disadvantage is. Disadvantages are like this, but I think when we contextualize and discuss this in the specific context to which how logical reasoning works and logical argumentation, it'll make a lot more sense when we go into a lot of these things later, because you'll know the building blocks that make it up, rather than just me showing you the finished product. So remember, claim, warrant, and impact. If you are not able to identify these three things, then it's not an argument. In your day-to-day life, try to identify some arguments and statements and point out the components and try to identify the differences between them. Thank you so much. You're good to go ahead and move on to the next one. Check the playlists for more educational content. If you have any questions, reach out to me in my email below. Thanks.